Hi, my name is James LaVeck. I'm the author of Life After Losses. What you're about to watch is a video recording from a conference call that I did on January 26, 2022, where we talked about grief triggers and forecasting responses to those grief triggers. I hope you find something useful out of the next 30 minutes or so, and I'll see you on the other side. So let's just go ahead and jump on into this topic here of trigger forecasting. So first of all, I work for a company who we use PowerPoints constantly, so that's just how I'm used to setting things up. So I am using a PowerPoint. I'm going to start with some introductions, do some of the Zoom basics. I know after 2 years of the pandemic, I'm sure most of us know how to use Zoom, so that shouldn't take too much time. And it has been actually a year since I launched the Life After Losses and released the book. Kind of give you an update on where we are with that. And then we'll talk about the trigger forecasting, what triggers are, how I've defined them in the book and the blog and the subsequent book. And then we'll have time for some Q&A. I know there were several questions that were submitted prior to the call, so I did capture those. There were about a half dozen I just noticed before I jumped on that registered after I had captured those information. So if you're one of those last few that just registered, there'll be an opportunity for Q&A when we get to that. So first of all, who the heck am I? So my name is James LaVeck. I'm the author of Life After Losses. I lost my first husband in 1995. I lost my second one in 2014. I am still a single parent of 2 teenagers living in north central Massachusetts, where it's cold. As a native Southern Californian, the seasons are something to get used to, and we're expecting about a foot of snow or more on Saturday. So I got to bundle up. I have spent the majority of my career in the financial services industry doing consulting and project management. I'm still doing consulting and project management as my full-time job. Part-time, I have worked on publishing these 2 books. One was Life After Losses, the original cover. And then the other one is Move Past Grief, which is a collection of stories. So one of these was a memoir. Life After Losses was the memoir, and then the collection of stories came afterwards. And then this past year, I have decided to kind of pursue an old dream of mine and do some acting. So I've completed 5 short films this past winter. Looking forward to actually seeing some of those get released and put out. But this is all about how I decided to, I've got to live my life, even after being widowed twice. And so, yeah, it has been a year. I self-published 2 books. One, like I said, was Life After Losses. The original subtitle was A Memoir of Love, Loss, and Life. I did do a rework of the cover. I think I really liked this one through the journey through the dark forest of light, but I was told it felt too dark for a memoir, and I wanted to lighten it up, so I did that. And then I just published this Moving Past Grief book this past winter, in December, actually. So by the numbers, starting with nothing, I have managed to sell over 500 books. I've managed to reach 500 people, over 500 people. When I look at the statistics for what a self-published book can do, 1 to 200 is considered really good. So I'm actually very proud of the 500 books that I managed to get in people's hands and reach a bunch of people. And then I've got you guys as the subscribers. I mean, I started with the 40 some odd people on my Facebook friends list, and it has ballooned at this point over 1,100 subscribers. I couldn't imagine doing this without being able to talk to you all, and that's what I'm doing this for. It's to I've been there, and I know what it's like to be deep in grief and not be able to see a way out. But I want to be able to help people find that way out for themselves so that they can live the life that they deserve. So, and then I've actually got the Life After Losses book. The audio is being recorded. My voice actor got COVID, and we need to wait for his voice to come back so that he could finish recording that. But that's coming out. I was hoping to have it this week, but it's probably going to be at least another month now at this point. So that's that. And now the topic that we're actually wanting to talk about is triggers. So I knew I wanted to mark the 1-year occasion of releasing the book somehow. And so I was talking to a mentor of mine and was thinking, I just want to do a meet and greet, basically. And he said, unless you have really raving fans that really care about who you are and want to meet and greet you, it's probably not a good idea. You want to be able to provide something that people are going to want to consume. And so he said, what is something that you can talk about that can provide some help and comfort to people right now? And I didn't take long to realize triggers. Triggers are a huge thing that we all deal with, whether they're good or bad. And we'll talk about the different types of triggers that I've written about. And then he went further and said, what is it that your audience really wants? I thought about that, and I said that if y'all are anything like me, you want your loved one back and you want your normal back. But we all know we can't do that. I can't bring your loved one back. I can't give you a normal. But at the same time, with this trigger forecasting idea, we can help define what normal is in our lives now. And so I started pulling all this stuff together to have this conversation with you, Go. And when we get to the Q&A part, or even during the thing, if there's a question, please raise your hand. I'd love to make this interactive as much as you're willing to make it interactive with me. So let's talk about what triggers are, at least how I define triggers in terms of the writing and how I categorize things in my brain, because that's just how my brain works. So the first kinds of triggers that we've got are the scheduled and the anticipated triggers. These are things that are calendar based. You know that they're going to happen. They happen like clockwork. Think things like holidays, birthdays, death days, anniversaries, all these things that you can look at a calendar and say, I know exactly what happened that day. And that it will likely trigger an emotional response from you on that day. So we know about those. We also have what I've called the unscheduled and anticipated, which is a reasonable expectation that something is going to trigger me. For example, watching a romantic movie, and you might feel like you missed somebody, or going to a restaurant that you used to go to, or going to places that you used to go to together, and seeing that kind of stuff. They're reasonably anticipatable that something that you might have an emotional response. A friend of mine last year lost her son, and she posted a story on Facebook today about how she went to a deli with her son all the time, and they ordered a specific sandwich, and she made a point today of going to that deli and asking for that sandwich and facing that fear and that trigger head on. And I thought that was very brave of her. It was an emotional wreck, which understandably happens, and but she took control over how she wanted that experience to be. And then, of course, there's the unscheduled, the unanticipated kind of things that just happen out of nowhere. You're listening to the radio and your song comes on, or you turn around the corner and some person that looks just like the person that you lost is walking away, and you flash for a second. If you're sorting through things and you find their handwriting, or there's other signs, cardinals, butterflies, pennies, coins being found, are some signs to some people that their loved one is actually talking to them. So that's how I've defined the triggers in the books and on the blog. And so then the next step is, how do I deal with these? And I'll tell you, this last week was just absolutely full of triggers. I mentioned that in one of the reminder emails. 2 days ago was the 8th anniversary of my second husband's death. I went out with a group of folks on a Saturday for lunch. No, it was Sunday for lunch. And I wound up sitting across from a gentleman who looked like my first husband, very similar. And then earlier in the week, I had seen a wine listing for Russian River Valley, which is where we used to go on vacations. And so there was a lot of emotions this past week for me in terms of triggers. And yeah, it's not all rainbows and unicorns for me, but because I've been grieving for a while, and I practice these techniques, I'm able to kind of pull myself out of any funk fairly easily, or not fairly easy, but I don't dwell as much as I used to. So one of the things I'm thinking of 3 steps here. For both the scheduled triggers, we've got the calendar. We know that these things are going to come up. We know if they're a positive date or a negative date. For me, a positive date would be like my wedding anniversary, or the holidays when we had fun, and the first time the kids came downstairs and saw the Santa dropped them something. Those are positive memories for me. Those are positive dates. And then there's the negative dates, the diagnosis date or the death date, or any other negative date. And so I look at a calendar and I have to, and I make that determination in my mind: is this a positive date or a negative date? And where do I want to think? Where is my emotional connection going to be best served? Is it going to be thinking positive or on the negative? Either one is accurate and valid. I've done both. I just know from my experience, acknowledging the truth when I'm in the truth makes life a lot easier for me. And then for the anticipated triggers, be aware. You're going to watch a romantic movie, for example. You expect that you're going to be triggered, and allow that yourself, that you know that you're going to do that. So you look at something and you will start to expect that something is going to happen. And then the second step is actually to pre-plan responses. So I've talked to hundreds of widowers who have talked about how a birthday is coming up, and they dread that birthday because their loved one isn't there. And what I'm suggesting is that you understand that those things may trigger you, and that you determine ahead of time how you want to feel. I could look at my anniversary, for example, as a sad day because I can't experience that with my husband anymore. Or I can choose to look at it and say, I want to have positive memories of the smiles that we had, or the fact that we didn't shove cake in each other's faces. We could have, but we didn't. Or the joy that our family had when they were with us. And I choose to think of those situations in a more positive light, because I know that the negativity just weighs me down. It's not to say that I haven't been in the negative. I have. If you read the first book, Life After Losses, I wrote very honestly about my struggles the first time I lost my first husband, where I basically spent 2 years in the bottle, not being able to cope with the grief. So I've looked at both sides. I've been on both sides. I'd much prefer being on the happier side, and I know that sometimes that's really difficult to see when you're grieving. But it's training. It's training your mind to do what you want it to do. And then, so one of the things, so the other thing that we're looking at is, how do you expect to experience the day? These widowers I talked about dreaded birthdays. That's what they expected to experience, but that's not what they wanted to experience. So I could dread my anniversary, like I said earlier, but I don't want to experience the day that way. I want to experience the good part of those days that I had. And so what steps can I take to make that experience be positive in my mind to me? It can be negative too. If you want it to be negative, then pre-plan it to be negative. I'm not rainbows and unicorns because I live in the real world, and I know that sometimes you just want to feel like crap, and there are times that all I wanted to do is cry and feel like crap, and that's perfectly fine too. So my point of this is just, I've been there, and I personally, right now, at this point in my life, want to focus on the more positive sides of my grief than on the pain. And I've been doing it for over 25 years for the first one, over 8 years for the second one. I have had the luxury of time to kind of determine where I fit in that thought. And there is no timeline, which is another one of the 13 pieces of advice that this is based on as well. At any rate, what we want to do is figure out what steps we can take to make that experience how we want it to be, and then think about any possible outcomes. So maybe I do cry. Then what? Is that a bad thing? I don't think it is. But if I do cry, then how do I want that to feel? Do I allow myself to do that, or am I just going to tell myself to buck it up, suck it up, buttercup, right? And I don't subscribe to one or the other. For me personally, I'm trying to be on the more positive side, and I'll share a story with you when we get through the last step about how I wanted to experience and how I actually experienced the first anniversary of my first husband's death. And then the third step is just to experience your emotions. Don't stifle the emotions. That is not healthy. Focus on what you said you wanted your emotional trigger experience to be. So in my case, I wanted it to be a positive for the anniversary or my wedding anniversary. And that's the kind of emotional experience I wanted. So I would look at pictures, or I would look at the video that we'd have, or I'd play our wedding song. We actually sang a song to each other on our way down the aisle. And that brings me some happiness to see that now. And then I start doing what I planned. So I had those pre-planned responses, and I start actually executing against that. Understanding, though, that the best laid plans usually fall aside. And when I share my story about that first anniversary of my first husband's death, it was definitely a show, and not a good show. And then focus on and honor your emotions. Right? Don't stifle the emotions. Forgive yourself if you fall short of your expectations, because this is what the pre-planning that you talk about, or that we talked about earlier. If you pre-plan how you're going to respond and what kind of changes you might have to adapt to, then you've already determined how you're going to feel if something goes wrong. in your original plan. I learned this the hard way, because the first time I needed to do this, I was my first husband died in August of '95. In April, I took some of his ashes with some wildflower seeds and some mulch, and I went on a hike, found a spot overlooking a river, and I planted the seeds with his ashes and the mulch, and tilled the area, and watered it, with the expectation that I would come back in 4 months in August, on the anniversary of his death, and to that spot, and I would expect to see flowers and some lovely wildlife around the area. So that August of '96, I got a helium balloon. I was going to tie a note to the balloon and set it off to heaven. So I took the balloon on a hike, and at the moment, at the hour of his passing the year prior, I was going to play a song on my, it was probably Walkman at the time, the music that he was listening to at the time of his death, and I was going to let the balloon go and just solemnly mark the occasion, and let him know that I was still thinking about it. So on the hike, the balloon decided it didn't like the walk, and popped on me. And I didn't have a spare balloon with me, so I was still determined to get to that site by that time, and listen to the song, look at the flowers that were planted. It got to the site, there were no flowers. It was blazing summer heat, and nothing took. So I didn't have that to look forward to. I did have the music, but it seemed a little off, and so I just finally said, you know what, this is not working for me, because this is not how I wanted to mark this occasion. So I hiked back down the hill. I went and got more helium balloons, tied the note to more helium balloons, and from my parents' yard, I set the balloon up, and then it got stuck in a tree. And there was my note just dangling from the tree. I can laugh at that now, but at the time it was devastating, because it was not going as I planned. And so this is where I have to accept now that sometimes life laughs at my plans. So I went back to the store, got I think probably the last 2 helium balloons there, because it was a very small area that my folks live in. Had to write a new note, found a spot where there weren't any trees, and I set it off, and it did actually go that time. And then the next morning, I found my note from the original note had dropped from the tree, because the balloon finally popped. All of that is just a story of how I wanted the day to go, how it didn't go the way I wanted it to go, and how I had to adapt to those changes. And literally, I was heartbroken. I was crying, and I was probably inconsolable at the time. Now, with some hindsight, I can look back at this and say that was a great learning exercise for being able to plan what I wanted and adapt to those changes, and then to forgive myself for the emotional outbursts that I inevitably had. So this is, in a very quick nutshell, what trigger forecasting is. I don't remember, do I have another slide? Yes. And so the reason I think that this kind of thing matters is because if you can anticipate a trigger, you can anticipate your response, and you get to modulate what your response is going to be. If you want it to be emotional, you want it to be happy, you want it to be sad, however you want your response to be, you get to modulate that by choosing ahead of time how you want to address those kinds of triggers. You get to decide how you want to respond to any situations. And for me, when I lost 2 husbands, I felt I had 0 control over my life. This kind of thing makes me feel like I have a little bit of control over how I'm going to experience my grieving and healing journey, and how I want to respond. And I can choose if I want to respond by staying in bed all day and crying, or if I want to get out of bed and do something else. It's okay, whatever decision I make for how I want to handle this. And so I'm hoping that between the story and this talk, that somebody on the line is maybe feeling how they can adapt something to this in their life, and see how it could work for you. So that's really it in a nutshell. So these are some of the comments and questions that were sent to me ahead of time. I will do my best to answer how I believe the answer is. I do believe that the answers are individual for everybody. You can, I believe, take inspiration in either my story or anybody's story who's gone through the grieving process, for whether it's a child or a spouse or a parent or a pet even. I think we can all draw inspiration from each other and understand that the process that we go through is universal, while the individual methods are not going to be, they're going to be individual. Yeah, I just said individual. I never said I was a public speaker. So one of the first question I got was, can you find love after the loss of a spouse? I believe yes, you can. I did. I got very lucky. I swore after I lost the second one that I would not date again because I was terrified, absolutely terrified of a three-peat. That was 8 years ago. I have since changed my mind on the idea of dating. I have not had a date yet, but I have opened myself up to potentially, possibly dating again. So I always have that wiggle room there. But yeah, I do believe that you can find love after loss of a spouse. It's not going to be the same, and you don't want it to be the same. At least I don't believe you do. It will be different, but it can be as intense and it can be as fulfilling as the love that you lost. And I don't want to say the love that you lost, because you didn't lose that love, right? It just turned from love to grief because you didn't have anybody physically to give that to. And I don't believe that love really ever goes away. So yes, I think our hearts have the capacity to love deeply and a lot. And you can absolutely find love after losing a spouse. And then there's people like Betty White, who, she was a widow for 40 some odd years, 50 years, 40, 45 years, I think, something like that. And she never remarried. So you're going to find the gamut. My belief is that yes, if you are ready, and I think the person that you find yourself with the second time or the third time, they need to honor your grief and let you grieve, and realize that that first person is not competition. So that's my 2 cents or penny and a half. This one I don't know that I can really relate to why it's so hard to grieve the loss of a child. I have 2 children that we adopted, and even after losing two spouses, I think that if I lost one of my children, um, that would probably do me in. To be honest with you, I don't. It's not the natural course of life, right? You're supposed to grow old, then die, and not outlive your children. And I know that happens an awful lot, and my heart breaks for any parent that has to go through that. I could not imagine doing such a thing, because you're always the parent. You're always that child has always been a part of you and will always be a part of you. So I mentioned my friend earlier today who lost her son last year. I can't imagine what that feels like, but I can certainly empathize with the loss and the emptiness that losing somebody that close to you is capable of. So I hope I never learn that lesson, and I hope most people never learn the lessons that I've learned as well. But I know that it happens, unfortunately. Another person asked, I lost my son. Can my son hear me? I believe that yes, that we are made of energy, and that our energy continues after our body ceases. And that energy, you can call it a soul, you can call it energy, whatever you'd like, but I believe that energy, we vibrate at certain frequencies, and we attract on those vibrations those that are important to us. And I don't believe that energy ever actually dissipates. I do believe that after somebody has passed on, that they can hear you. There have been many times where I have spoken to both of my husbands and gotten a response in one form or another, whether it was a hummingbird buzzing my head from the first one, or a cardinal just jumping up on my on the bush in front of me for my second one. But yes, I think so. There's the I'll just say yes. I believe that your son can hear you. Because I don't think that the energy ever leaves. Another person said that she lost her husband of 43 years in June past year, a veteran who had suffered from Agent Orange related illnesses in Vietnam. 43 years, man, that's a long time. And just having a very difficult time dealing with this. In my experience, the first year is full of, it was a year ago that X happened, or it was a year ago that we did Y. The second year for a lot of people tends to be a little bit harder in terms of their grieving. So what I usually tell people in that first year or two is just to be extra kind to yourself. Forgive yourself for any emotions that you're having. And I've written about in both books the various stages of grief, and the anger, the bargaining, the acceptance, and how we don't ever just stay in one spot. We go all over the place, and no matter how long it's been, I can still find myself in an anger spot pretty easily when I think of the circumstances around both of their deaths. And I don't like using a timeline. I don't believe that there is a timeline to grieving. I think you grieve as long as you grieve, and I don't believe that it ever leaves you. I do believe that grief will stick with you. Um, but what I'm trying to do in terms of defining my normal is making it more of a companion instead of an overlord. So I now have a shadow of grief that walks with me instead of over me. That I can, if I need to, turn off a light to turn the shadow away. I'm very sorry for your loss. I've written in the book, the Life After Losses book. I wrote down 13 pieces of advice. Those are free and downloadable off of the website lifeafterlosses.com. And this piece about the triggers is part of those pieces of advice. And I think those are all things that are helpful to defining what normal is going to look like for you. After 43 years, you had set yourself into routines and habits. Hopefully you have friends and family that you can talk to. One of the things that I found very helpful is that I can still talk about both of my husbands to very good friends, and I still get that their memories aren't completely lost, and so therefore they're still alive, and I feel I can still connect to them, and I think that's part of the energy piece, being that I can still connect at some point. And then another person wrote that their pet had died last year, and he had withdrawn and pushed people away when his grandparents had passed away a few years prior to that. And so he never really grieved his grandparents passing, but losing his pet made him face that. And I think if we don't face our individual grief, that as these losses in our lives pile up, whether it's another death, whether it's a pet, whether we're losing our job, we lost our house, whatever, any of these losses, as they pile up on that grief, if we haven't dealt with that grief, it's just going to compound. And then at some point, it's going to get just too unbearable. So this is why I like to write about finding your truth where you're at and addressing your truth where it's at, and not stifling those emotions, because that's really, there are studies, and I wrote about that in the book and the blog. There are studies that indicate that holding in your emotions is as damaging to you as smoking and other self-inflicted, I guess would be a good term, health issues. So I'm a firm advocate of doing that. I'm absolutely a firm advocate of seeking professional help as well. People who can help diagnose things like complicated grief, which has recently been added to the diagnostics, the DSM manual, so that you can get treatment. Again, what works for me may not work for everybody, but I believe that my advice is sound enough that people can take an inspiration to do something in their lives. I certainly hope that you found that helpful and that you learned something that will help you work through triggers in the future. Dealing with triggers is just one of the 13 pieces of advice and strategies that I've shared in both books, and it's a downloadable cheat sheet on the website. I've learned and lived these strategies for over 25 years, and I still use them to this day. I've compiled those pieces of advice and strategies into a workbook designed to prompt healing. Now, the workbook is immediately downloadable from lifeafterlosses.com/workbook. It is 60 pages of stories, strategies, and questions to help you consciously think about ways to heal. And I've written before about conscious grieving, and that is the place where I feel that our healing journey begins, is when we're consciously aware of what we're doing. Now, I'll be honest, I've never done a workbook before. It's not the same thing as writing a memoir. But that's the same type of work that I did in my own healing journey. And And because this is new, I want to make sure that I can offer some support to those of you who are willing to try out version 1.0. So I want to be able to take your feedback and your learnings and develop a better version if I can. So for the time being, I'm offering email support as part of the package of buying the workbook. So for $24.95, you can immediately download the workbook. You can immediately start the process of your conscious healing. You can email me for support as you work through the book so I can make it better for everybody else. So all you have to do is go to lifeafterlosses.com/workbook or scan the QR code on your screen. Whether you choose to buy or not, thank you for your time. And again, I really do hope that you gained some information from this recorded session. And I really do hope that we all find some peace.